Excellent!
What's up, everybody? Big Swede here once again. Thanks for joining me for part 2 of the Project Sith Lord PC build. If you remember part 1, we assembled all the parts on the motherboard and got that installed in the case. Today, we're going to be doing the finishing touches on this. We're going to be installing the power supply today. We have an EVGA Supernova 650G3, 650 watt power supply. Definitely more power than we need for this build. But, you know, it's a little bit of future-proofing. If I'm ever going to upgrade and I need more power, definitely have the power available for that. We're also installing the graphics card today. We have the MSI GTX 1060 Gaming X, so we'll get that installed. We're also installing a Samsung 1TB SSD for some large file storage. Now, one thing you won't see me do that I've already done off camera, I replaced the stock fans that came with the NZXT case with these really awesome Corsair LL120 RGB lights. Man, those things are really going to set this thing off as far as the Sith Lord theme. Once we get it all together and up and running, you'll see what I'm talking about. Alright, so I kind of made a bit of a rookie mistake. When I was filming the footage of putting the PC together, I forgot to turn the microphone on the camera on. So all the footage I have of me building this thing out, no audio to go with it. So I think what I'm going to do is I'll just kind of roll that stuff in here as like B-roll footage, and I'll talk over the top of it just to kind of explain what I'm doing. Hopefully it'll work as well as what I had originally talked about during the build. But yeah, we'll get the point across, and you'll see kind of the process of how everything goes. All right, let's get in it. All right, so let's get started with installing the power supply. Now, when it comes to power supplies, you basically have two routes you can go. You can go the cheaper route and get your standard pre-wired power supply that'll have a big bundle coming out of it that has a lot of wires and connectors on it. The problem with that is you're going to end up with a lot of connectors that you don't use that you then have to try and cable manage and stow away. So I decided to go with a modular power supply here. This gives me the ability to just use the cables that I need, so I don't have to worry about a lot of unused wires that I then have to cable manage. Now, the cables we're going to be using, just 4 of them for this build. We have our 24-pin ATX motherboard power. We have our 8-pin CPU power. We have our 8-pin VGA graphics card power, and then we have one SATA power cable that has 3 connectors on it that we will use, so we won't have any excess connectors that we then aren't using and need to cable manage. So another bonus to going with a modular power supply is you're generally going to get very nice looking black cables. On your cheaper power supplies that are pre-wired, you're generally going to get like a rainbow of colors on the wires, and when you're trying to do a clean system, it just doesn't look that good. Eventually I'll be replacing these with some custom braided wires that will fit the Sith Lord theme we're going for, but for now these black wires will do just fine. So we're going to plug all these into the power supply and then get the power supply installed in the case and start running things. Now, all these cables are marked. This is your motherboard power. So we'll just take this and plug it into the spot that it's labeled on the power supply until it clicks in. And there's one. Here's your CPU power here. Next up, we have our VGA. Now this has 2 VGA slots, so we're just using one. And then lastly, our SATA power cable. And there are several of these as well, and we just use one. And that is all of the wires that we're going to be using on this build. Now in this particular case, the power supply gets mounted underneath of this shelf on the bottom. So we just slide it in from the back and then line up the screw holes and install the screws. All right, now on the back side here, you can see just the amount of cables and wires we have to deal with. And that's why I say that going with a modular power supply is definitely the better way to go, because you already have a lot of cables to manage, so why bother adding cables that you're not going to use that you then have to cable manage. So we have our power supply cables here. This right here is our front panel connectors, our power switch, USB connectors and stuff on the front. Here we have our fan header for the Corsair fans, and then all of our wires for the individuals fans themselves. So we're gonna get started hooking stuff up. We'll worry about cable management later once we get everything hooked up. Then we'll start tucking things away and making it neat. For now, we're just gonna get things routed and start installing things. All right, for our major power supply connections, your motherboard ATX power is going to route in through the side pass through and connect into the side of the motherboard on the front. Your CPU power is going to route up over the top and plug into the top of the motherboard on the other side. And then your graphics card power is going to route up underneath through the shelf and connect to the graphics card once we get that installed. All right, so I think we're going to get the fans wired up first, and then we'll start worrying about our other connections. So we'll first hook up all of our RGB cables from the fans to the Corsair RGB lighting controller here. Each fan has one RGB wire coming from it that plugs into the fan controller here. And then it also has a power wire coming from each fan that will then hook up to your fan headers on the motherboard. All right, first we're going to route our ATX motherboard power cable through the pass-through here and plug it into the motherboard. Just press in until you hear it click in. And then we'll just kind of pull the excess back through the pass-through, make it look pretty neat. And as I said, these the custom cables will look a lot nicer once we get them installed. Now next we'll be routing the CPU power cable through the top pass-through above the motherboard here. So you just pull your cable through and then connect it to the connector on the motherboard. This one can be a little bit of a pain just because you're working in a very small area and there's the two exhaust fans there, so you kind of have to work it in there, but it's not too bad. And next we will grab our VGA power cable and we will route that through the hole in the bottom shelf here. Pull it up through the hole, and we will just pull that through and let it sit until we get the graphics card installed. Alright, now we're going to start working on our front panel cables. We'll connect our USB cable to the USB 3.1 header here on the motherboard, and that's going to go to your USB connections on the top front panel. All right, next up, we're going to route our front panel connectors. This one here is for your audio, for your headphone and microphone jacks on the front panel. And then your other one here is for your power switch and your hard disk drive light. Now, one thing that I love that NZXT does, and so far they're the only case manufacturer I've seen that does it, is they put this connector into one block. Most case manufacturers are going to have these as individual wires that you have to then put onto the right pins. So it's very nice that they're all in one block, easy to plug into the board. So that's going to plug right into the board here. Simple. Then your HD audio, again, plugs in to the motherboard just like the front panel connector does. Now your motherboard manual is going to show you where all these connections are. They might be different on different motherboards, so always refer to your manual. All right, next up, we're going to hook up our fan power to the motherboard. We'll start with, this will be fan 1, 2, and then 3. So we're going to connect the wires to the fan headers on the motherboard. And then the RGB controls, like I said, go on to the fan controller on the backside. 1, 2, and 3, the same sequence. Now on your motherboard, you're going to have fan headers labeled fan 1, fan 2, fan 3, whatever. So this one here, since it's 1, we're going to hook to fan header 1. Kind of try and tuck the wires back here a little bit. All right, fan 2 is actually on the bottom of the motherboard, so we'll route that behind and then up through the bottom. And then fan header 3 is on the side above the ATX motherboard power, so we'll come through the side pass through and plug that into the motherboard right there. All right, our last connector that we were going to have to connect on the front side is going to be our SATA cable. And that's going to be for our 2.5 1 terabyte SSD. So we'll run that through the pass-through on the bottom of the board. And we're using this 90-degree connector to plug into the connector on the board. Now, everything else we're going to do is going to be on the back side, so let's flip it around. Alright, so this may look like a big mess of wires. We're going to get all that cleaned up here shortly, but first we need to make a couple connections here on the back side, mainly being our 1 terabyte SSD here. NZXT cases have these cool little removable sleds that you can install your SSDs on. You can install them here on the back wall. You can also mount them on the tray on the front inside. I like to keep them on the back side out of sight. So we got 2 connectors to put here. Our SATA data cable that we connected to the motherboard connects here. And then one of our SATA power cables will connect into here as well to give power to the drive. Our second SATA cable, well actually both of the cables will then go to the Corsair fans. One going to the RGB fan controller that we have up here. And then the other one will go to the Lighting Node Pro that we don't have hooked up yet. I will be hooking that up here shortly. It hooks up to the SATA power cable and then also to one of the USB headers on the bottom of the board. Alright, so now it's time to work on some cable management. We'll get all of this stuff cleaned up and looking nice and neat, so it's not just a big bird's nest back here. So yeah, we'll start working on that. Alright, so we got all of our cable management done. It's looking pretty clean. We got our LED strips installed. I did install one across the top in the front, and then we did install one back here behind the bar covering up the cable pass-through. So it should look pretty cool. Alright, so let's flip this thing around and get our graphics card installed. Alright, it's time to install the GTX 1060 now. It's going to go in this first PCI slot. We'll unlock the locking mechanism here. And now on the back here, you're going to have to remove the PCI slot covers. Take this first panel off. And then we need to figure out which of these slot covers we need to remove. The best way to do that is to just kind of mock up the card in there and see which ones they line up with. In this case, it's going to be slot 2 and 3 on the back. Now, when you take these covers off, you can discard the covers because you won't need them anymore, but do hang on to the screws because you will use those to attach the graphics card. All right, we take our graphics card and we are going to line it up on the PCIe slot. Make sure all of our stuff on the back side is lined up correctly and just push it into place and it will lock in. Once it's in place, we will take our screws that we took the cover plates off with and install those to hold the graphics card in place. We're going to take our VGA power connector here that we routed up through the floor and connect that to the graphics card. Clean it up a little bit, and there we go. All right, guys, it's the moment of truth. We're going to hit the power button and see if everything turns on. Now, mind you, there's no LED control software or anything installed yet, so it's going to be just a chaos of RGB lighting in there. But just want to see if everything turns on right now. Then we'll go into the BIOS, check some stuff, and then start getting Windows installed and getting some programs installed. But let's see if it works. Boom! All right, let's get into the BIOS and see if everything works. All right, cool. BIOS is up. I'm going to go through and check some things in here, like my RAM is running at 2133, which is basically your standard. This RAM is rated at 3200, so I got to go in there and change that, check some other things, and then we'll get going installing Windows and everything, and I'm going to start working on that stuff, and we'll see you guys in a bit. All right, so we got Windows running, got all the lighting controls set up, almost the way I want them. The ring around the AMD cooler there is not responding to any of the programs I have, and I was kind of expecting that. There's another program I'm gonna have to download to run that. I really wish I didn't have to, but seems like that's the way it's gonna have to be if I want to have that controlled red as well. But yeah, there you go. Project Sith Lord lives. Yeah, we're gonna run some benchmarks and stuff on this, see how it's doing. All stuff for future videos. We do have a couple of other add-ons to this down the road. Stuff that I didn't want to do right now just because I wanted to get the thing up and running. But little touches here and there that we're gonna add on as we go. But that's all we got today, guys. I just wanted to get the build up and running and show you guys the final product. So as always, if you like what I'm doing, give me that thumbs up. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button up there. Stay up to date with any new videos we got coming out. We will catch you next time. Till then, live life and have fun out there.